Hello, wonderful. I'm Paige, and I realized that I was a huge hypocrite. This was one of the most powerful moments of my entire life. You're going to need some context about me in order to realize the full extent of this realization of hypocrisy. I'm now going to go into some very, very uncomfortable and extremely triggering details. I grew up experiencing a lot of abuse. I was bullied in elementary and middle school, a lot of times physically. I wasn't really the type to fight back, so that's probably one of the reasons it kept happening, but I did a whole lot of contemplation. I wanted to understand how people could possibly find hurting someone to be amusing. I would study people to try and figure out what makes some lack such valuable empathy. I finally learned that people not only react differently to trauma, but our brains actually change in different ways as well, and everyone's been through some type of trauma. I was also sexually abused many, many times growing up. The first time was when I was about 6 years old, but it really started to weigh heavy in middle school when I was being repeatedly sexually and physically abused and bullied by the same person over and over again, and sometimes his friend too. I'm not going to list everything that happened or go into every detail, but I do want to create an emotional response and connection with other people who've been through similar experiences. I am also doing this to create a comparison, which we will get to later on. I've been pulled into the woods and date raped as an adult too. I was raped twice within the same year at 19 years old by two different complete strangers. I was scared to go home after one of the incidents because I didn't want to talk about it. I just wanted it to go away. So I was relieved when everyone was asleep when I got home. I immediately went upstairs, turned the water on, sat in the tub, held my legs, and started sobbing. I realized I had to move at some point because the water would eventually get cold. That's when I turned the water as hot as I could take it, and I started scrubbing really hard, trying to get the feeling of his hands off of me. I felt like I couldn't get clean, like I was dirty no matter how hard I scrubbed. All I could see and feel is what had just happened to me replay over and over again in my head. Later that year, it happened again with someone else. I remember seeing that second abuser a few weeks later walking down the street. I decided to run up to him and confront him. I don't know if I was yelling, but I was definitely being loud, using very large gestures, asking him how he could possibly derive pleasure knowing what he was doing and why he did it. He shrugged his shoulders, continued to walk, keeping his gaze ahead of him. I kept following him and asking him until he finally slowed down a bit. Barely glancing at me out of the corner of his eye, he shrugs his shoulder again, saying, "New experiences, you know?" I stopped with my mouth slightly gaped in awe as he walked away. I developed hypertension, paranoia, anxiety, and CPTSD from the abuse. In school, I would break down sometimes, unable to move, feeling like I was experiencing the abuses over and over again. I would cry in school almost every day, with a straight face because I was so used to it. I couldn't stop the tears, but if I tried to hold them back, it would end up being an ugly cry, and way more people would notice. So I just learned how to let the emotions flow through me. I learned to welcome them if I could. My PTSD was triggered by so many things. I felt like I couldn't really watch hardly anything or listen to a lot of music. TV ads using sexual appeal, I mean, it was everywhere. I've spent countless hours sobbing in my bedroom, rocking back and forth, trying to comfort myself. I coped with a lot of drawing, dark humor, drugs, alcohol, and romance. Luckily, I've done a significant amount of healing, so I don't get triggered nearly as easy anymore. I truly forgive and have developed sympathy towards them, wishing healing upon them, and I think that this is one of the things which has set me free in very recent years. I've finally put those questions to rest, preventing me from dwelling any more of my life away. Being able to pick it up and put it down at will gives me a sense of control over my life. Learning how to let go and focus on the things within my control, like my life and my potential, is probably the largest aspect of my healing. I've had to become resilient, despite the things which have happened in the past and may even happen again. During a prolonged episode, I was fixated on the issue of sexual exploitation for months in early 2019. I was watching and reading a lot of content from people who've been through similar experiences in order to learn how they deal with the aftermath and healing from their trauma. I also went to therapy, and my first therapist did specialize in sexual trauma, but she couldn't handle my case. It was too much for her, so she referred me to a sex trafficking therapist. It did end up helping me a lot at the time. While I was searching for information to help me with my trauma, I came across a video that was beyond disturbing. It was about a group of siblings who were being sexually exploited by their own parents for money. They were aged from toddler to preteen. I think there were about 7 of them. They were rescued by authorities and rehabilitated. They had a therapist who asked them many questions and had them do some exercises. One of those exercises included the children being put in a padded room so that they could express their anger. It reminded me of when I tore my room apart a few times, hitting, kicking, crying, and stopping to sob in silence between bursts of anger. I remember wishing I had that validation, that my behavior wasn't just normal for what I've been through, but healthy and actually encouraged by professionals, which was shocking to me. Throughout watching this video, I felt like I wanted to help them and protect other children from going through sexual abuse and trauma. I felt powerless that I couldn't help them or any other victim of violence, especially children. I thought about how many there were going through these things right now, and how could we possibly create a safer world for them? There's another layer of psychological trauma that's kind of difficult to explain and understand unless you've been through sexual abuse yourself. If you've experienced physical abuse, there's that same feeling that you don't matter and that your innocence have been taken from you because, according to your subconscious, you should have protected yourself. With sexual trauma, it goes farther to feel as if your body and existence is for everyone except for yourself. There's the feeling that your intimacy has been forced and violated. This can make intimacy feel either wrong, cheap, or shallow, and is probably always confusing, sad, or scary when you are intimate by choice. It can make you feel like you're walking around naked all the time, like that's all people see when they look at you. And as with any abuse, the feeling that you can't hide, and your abuser or next abuser could be anywhere. They could be watching and waiting to spot you. Well, that's all I wanted to share for context and comparison. And I wish I could tell you that it gets better from here, but it doesn't. Later that year, in 2019, I stumbled across a video by Earthling Ed titled, "You Will Never Look at Your Life the Same Way Again," an eye-opening speech. He opened the speech by saying that he wasn't always vegan, and he eats the same things that he did before, such as tacos and pizza, just vegan versions of them. He then explains that by eating animal products, we go against our innate compassion and human design. Throughout his speech, he challenges marketing phrases from animal agriculture, such as free-range eggs. He explains that they are not free, as free-range hens come from hatcheries, where the males are gassed or macerated in an open blender as soon as they are born. We know that female chickens are debeaked and placed into barns where they barely have any room to move, and most will never see the sunlight or breathe fresh air until the day that they die. We know that all free-range hens end up at a slaughterhouse where a knife is pulled across their throat. Make no mistake, there is no freedom in free range. He then challenges the advertisement "Happy cows produce happy milk" by asking a series of rhetorical questions that goes as follows. Is the cow happy when she's forcefully impregnated? Is she happy when her baby is taken away from her? Is that mother happy when what she has produced for her child is stolen from her? Is she happy when she's loaded into a truck or trailer and taken to the slaughterhouse? Is she happy when the bolt gun is placed against her head and the knife is pulled across her throat? I couldn't believe the conditions and processes that he was describing. Before this video, I haven't fully realized that these beings are being forced to go through this because of me, and there's another option. Though similar thoughts have crossed my mind many times, and learning that we could live perfectly healthy while avoiding taking lives had resurfaced all of these memories. Within one of these memories, I found that I couldn't kill an animal myself if I didn't have to. When I was taken out to hunt as a child, I wasn't able to pull the trigger on an animal like I thought I was going to. I simply tried not to think about it while eating, and I didn't think that anything was wrong with eating animal products. I didn't feel like I was causing the killing if I wasn't the one who had done it, but I definitely didn't want to be around when it was happening. I remember feeling sorrow for the crabs who have escaped from the pot of boiling water just to be returned again and again. I remember wanting to take them and release them into the water near my house. But I would still eat them afterwards, placing all of their suffering into the back of my mind. I thought this is just how the world works, and I should probably just get over it for my own sake. This was before I even knew that veganism existed. I also remember learning how to fish when I was around 10 years old. I was told that the fish weren't in pain and they couldn't feel the hook in their mouth when I asked if it's okay to do this to them. I thought I wasn't doing it right because it was obvious that I was hurting them. I also assumed that we must have to do this to animals, or else we wouldn't be. I also watched a family member build a trap to catch rabbits so that we could turn them into stew when I was in middle school. That made me feel really guilty. I was uncomfortable but curious about how it worked, as I was a curious kid, so I focused on that aspect. I later saw the rabbits in cages, and my first instinct was to help them by opening the cages. I fought with myself not to. I felt horrible looking them in the eyes, knowing that I was going to be eating them later. And I felt that I was playing a role in taking their lives from them. I didn't dare show my family what I was thinking and feeling. After all, we have to eat, and I didn't want to seem like the weak-minded one who wasn't having a good time. I thought I would seem silly if I had showed what I was thinking and feeling. After watching that speech, I had to learn more. I went down the rabbit hole of vegan activism online and found the documentary Dominion. Me and my partner at the time watched on Netflix later that night, as I thought it would be a lot easier than explaining what I had been contemplating. I also wanted to see what they meant by artificial insemination and forced impregnation, debeaking, all of these practices and conditions which sound so awful. I wanted to witness how bad it is, especially while being fully aware for the first time that I can eat delicious food, be healthy, and not contribute to their death and suffering. As we watched Dominion, we were both absolutely horrified. It was the most hellish thing I've ever seen. Imagine being born onto a metal floor full of feces and urine where you develop sores which get infected. Your teeth are ripped out with pliers and your tail is cut off. Your siblings are dying of disease and are being crushed by your mother who can't even turn around in the cage. If you actually make it to 6 months old, you'll be beaten into a chamber where you'll be gassed with the same gas from the Jewish Holocaust. This gas burns you from the inside out, and it is so painful that many pigs rip their feet off in between the bars out of pure frustration. In other cases, pigs have their throats slit where they're thrashing around as they bleed out, and sometimes are still able to be screaming while it happens. These animals are living in so much pain and suffering 24/7. It is seriously unbelievable. You can see it all over their faces. These 6-month-old pigs have the cognitive ability of 3-year-old human children. In the dairy industry, they artificially inseminate cows with a contraption that the industry themselves have named the rape rack. They named it that because they know exactly what they're doing. The farmer will put his entire arm into the cow's anus so that he can stick a metal prod through the other part and artificially impregnate her with a sack of semen. The semen was taken from a bull who they either ejaculated by hand or with a machine, which is very painful for them. As they strap her to the rack, she struggles in fear. When the farmer begins to forcefully impregnate her, she squishes her body up to the front of the rack to try to get away from him. Her face and her eyes tell us how she feels, and it's a face of terror, helplessness, and violation. When I seen the look in her eyes, I felt the same feelings that I felt when I was being raped. It's no different just because they're cows. It is obvious that they are capable of experiencing the same feelings and traumas that we do. It is also obvious that when these animals get into these situations where they know that they are about to be violated, beaten, or killed, either from the smells, watching the others, or from past experiences, they run, they fight, they scream for their lives. They cower in fear at the sight of a human. All of these animals suffer from the same exact hypertension, anxiety, paranoia, and PTSD that I've developed from sexual abuse, bullying, and physical abuse. Except it's their entire life, and that's on top of living in the conditions that they do. Being neglected, physically mutilated, beaten over and over again, suffering from disease, as well as being brutally killed. Compared to them, my life's been a cakewalk. A vegan cakewalk. The only ones who do get to heal and actually live out their lives on sanctuaries are those who are rescued by animal rights activists. During the fur industry segment of the film, there were sheep who were literally screaming and bleeding as workers ripped patches of wool out of their skin. I looked down at the Ugg boots I was wearing at the time and got really upset as I pulled them off and threw them right in the trash. So there I was, constantly wondering how people could do such horrible things to each other and to me. Yet I've caused thousands of others not only sexual exploitation, but far, far worse, without any consideration for the victim. Those children in that video, who I wanted to save so badly, were experiencing some of the same exact traumas that each of these animals go through. Animals have the capacity to feel pain, be violated, abused, and develop mental health issues, just like us. So for the same reason we wouldn't want to exploit people for their bodies to avoid inflicting pain and suffering onto others, we shouldn't want to exploit animals for their bodies either. I remember looking down at my hands and back up onto the screen. I was finally realizing that I have victims. I'm the reason this is happening. I was realizing that I've been a huge hypocrite in the worst way possible by thinking I was any different from the people who just didn't care or think about my perspective when they wanted something from me. I did the same thing to animals with the cognitive ability of children. I was watching terrified animals living in filth and fighting for their lives, thrashing around as their lives were taken from them. And I've been eating their dead bodies. I can't bring them back and treat them better or explain to them why I just didn't know how to. I promised them that I am going to wake other people up, and I just knew that the world was going to change. It has to. I looked at my ex and told him that there's no way I can keep doing this. And he looked at me and said, "Me neither." I explained that I don't even know what I'm going to eat, but it's not going to be them. I remembered what Ed was saying in his speech about eating vegan versions of the same foods, so I trusted that I'd figure it out and be fine. The next day, I researched about how to go vegan and learned about all the things to avoid on labels, as well as the definition of veganism and other industries to avoid, such as zoos and aquariums. I binge watched and saved a ton of recipe videos. I was so excited to try out all these foods that I've never heard of, but have been in the grocery store my entire life. After going to the grocery store, we decided to get rid of all of our non-vegan belongings. We never looked back, not for a second. We were actually both pretty excited to make such a positive change. It was a huge plus that after just the first 2 weeks, we both felt healthier and more energetic. I also felt great about the essential environmental impacts a vegan diet just so happens to have on our planet. But of course, the change that I'm most proud of is that I finally learned how to truly respect animals. Vegans tend to have similar feelings of hypocrisy during the transition phase. So, what was the moment that you realized your hypocrisy like?